Okay, so where are we at? What cemetery is this?
It's the Ellen Catholic, Roman Catholic Cemetery.
Okay. And who in your family is buried out here?
Well, my grandparents on my mother's side, and my grandparents on my father's side, and my parents, and my brother Frank and his wife, my sister Annie and her husband, my brother Casper, and nuns. None of them are buried here because they're buried in the convents wherever they were. My brother Charles, and my wife, and my brother Tony's wife, and my brother Irvin. So that's about the family members that are buried in here, yeah.
And whose gravesite is this right here?
No, this is my father, Franz Boechler, and my mother, Catherine. Her maiden name was Salzler, on this side. On the other side is my grandfather, Frank Boechler, and my grandmother, Regina, who was a Carey.
Did you get to know your grandparents at all?
I didn't know my grandfather. He passed away in 1924. My grandmother passed away in 46. And she lived with us until she passed away, and she passed away in our house. In behind us, on the other tombstone way at the end, is my grandfather, Salzler, and my grandmother, Catherine, who were the grandparents on my mother's side.
Can you tell me a little bit about your grandmother that lived with you?
She was very handicapped because of her weight. She had a lot of trouble walking, and it was very difficult for her. She had a little house in town, and periodically she got tired of living out with us. That was in the earlier years, maybe in the beginning of the 40s. And we would bring her into town, and she had everything in her town that she needed. And so she'd stay there for a while. And when we went to school, she lived in the house, which would have been in the mid-30s and so on. She lived in her house, and in the wintertime, maybe 4 or 5 of us stayed with her at a time in town here during the month of January and February, when it was extremely cold, and we went to school. And of course, we had to go to church every morning. There was no doubt about that. Not with grandmother. You wouldn't miss nothing. And then, later on, when she got older and she had trouble walking, she didn't stay in town at all anymore. In the last few years, she stayed out with our place. She was the kind of a mother who was very, to my, I should say, a mother-in-law, very always interfering. And we had a nice big home, as you saw, and we had a nice kitchen upstairs. But grandmother lived upstairs, and she'd be always out in the kitchen telling my mother, oh, you should be doing it this, you should be doing that way. And rather than have a problem, my mother decided that we're going to move the kitchen downstairs, and she couldn't come down the steps. So it was done quiet, solved the problem, and we always have this kids have to run the meals up and take the meals up to grandma and then get the dish back down again. But it was, I think, a very nice way of solving a problem, rather than telling her to keep her mouth out of it. So.
Do you when you would stay with her in town, do you remember what she was like? What type of
She was a kind person, but she really ruled the roost. There was nothing, when it was time to go to bed, and we'd go to bed, and we were just young kids, and we all slept in one big room. She had a bed over in that corner, and there were no lights, a kerosene lantern light, which maybe threw a little bit of a ray here or there. And we guys would climb into a bed, 3 of us in the bed over here and 2 in the bed over there. And we'd try and whisper to each other. But she'd hear us. And oh my God, we weren't even allowed to whisper anymore. And we had to go to bed at 8 o'clock in the evening. It was pretty tough.
So your grandmother and grandfather, did they come over from Germany?
They came,
From Russia?
My grandfather was born in Germany and moved over to Russia. And from there, in 1890, they moved over into the United States, into South Dakota, and then in 1903 they moved up here. My dad was born in Russia. My mother was born in the United States. She was a Salzler, and they came over up here into Canada in 1905. And I know in my dad's memoirs, he says he saw this pretty girl that just moved up from the United States. And he says, he didn't write this in his memoirs, but he says, boy, I'm going to get her for my wife come hell or high water. And he did.
So your dad was born in Russia?
Yeah, my dad was born in Russia.
How old was he when he came over?
Well, he was born in 84. He was 6 years old when they left Russia in 1990, and then came over here. So he was 6 years old when they came to the United States, and then in 1903 they moved up here. So that would have been 3 plus 16. He'd have been 19 years old when he came up here, and at that age he could take up a homestead. And my grandfather could take up a homestead, so they each had a homestead. And in those documents that I gave you, it shows how much land they had to till every year and how many horses they had and all that stuff. It's in that.
So did your dad ever talk to you about what life was like in Russia? Did he have memories?
No, he didn't, but grandmother talked a lot about, beside the, I think she's called it the Volga River, and the grapes were growing on the banks, and it was so beautiful there, and she felt sad that they had to leave. But, and you know, when grandfather says, we're getting out of here, the Bolshevik Revolution is starting, so they had to go, yeah.
Did your dad ever talk to you about what life was like in North Dakota?
No, my dad was the only child, and he was very quiet. He was almost what you call a loner. You know, even as we grew up, when we were real small, he'd sometimes sit us on his lap or sit around the chair, and he'd tell us some stories about some hunting coyote or fox or something. But as we grew up as young, he'd give us our orders. Today you're going to do this, tomorrow you're going to do that, and so on. And there wasn't much of a conversation between him and us.
Were you close to him when you were growing up?
Close to him, as close as he would let us. Later on, after I was married, he lived in town in the senior residence up here, and I would go up and visit him an awful lot. And he was very kind to me, and in fact, I was shocked when he gave me the power of attorney out of all the boys, and I'm the third youngest, and he says, no, Wilf, I want you to be the power of attorney. And I was blown away because I was just wondering what my older brothers feel like when he gives me this, I suppose you can call it an honor and an obligation. But yeah, he respected me a lot for the things that I did, yeah.
Was he the strict one between your mom and your father?
Oh yeah. If you wanted the car, you never go to Dad. You went to Mom. Somehow she'd wangle him into it, you know. Yeah. Because, well, you know, he was always afraid of drinking and driving, and we weren't drinkers, not by any stretch of the imagination. If we'd have been caught, we'd have been killed, so why drink? But, well, we had our drinks, of course, but not, yeah. Mm-hmm. This is the plaque here that I put on then after our celebration.
Okay.
The group that gave me the privilege to do this. And but back in 88, I think it was in 88, I'm not too sure, doesn't matter that much, we had a Boechler reunion. You see, there were 3 brothers. My grandfather, his brother John, and his brother Philip came over at the same time into the United States. Later on, a sister came over into Texas. And when in 1988 we had a Boechler reunion for everyone that was on this continent that came over, and that was the only Boechlers that came over. And there were 1,600 eligible. Yeah. With all the children, the grandchildren, the in-laws, and everything else. We had about 800 here. From Alabama, a good friend of mine, James Boechler, whose mother was a Boechler, got married to a Boechler. He was up here, he played the accordion, and he plays the little button accordion, which is this lofty music. And he plays in a band called the Mittennachters, the Midnighters. It's German, huh? Mittennachters, the Midnighters. And I've got a tape where he is playing, and he and I, and you know, we sat together. We had this thing over in the curling rink, or the skating rink, and he says his mother was here from North Dakota. She lives in North Dakota, the Boechler family. And he picked up his mother, and they came up here for this reunion. And his mother says, is there anybody around here that can play a guitar? I said, yeah, I play a guitar. Oh, okay, go get it. So I got it, and we went up on the stage, and holy Kalidas, no matter what he played, I could play exactly the same thing. It was, honestly, you would think we had played together. We had people dancing on the ground floor in there, yeah. It was such lofty music, you know, that kind of music he plays, yeah. Yeah, you know, it's surprising how things run in families.
So tell me a little bit about your mother. What type of person was she?
My mother was a saintly woman. She never complained. There were lots of times I would see her with a towel wrapped around her head because she had headaches. She had, I don't remember just what her health problem was, but she was taking a product called beef iron and wine, and another medicine that was a German medicine called Alpenkräuter. It comes from Switzerland. And there was a man in town here, a German man, who could order this for her. And one day, and I was about 16 years old or something like that, when I saw that she wasn't taking this medicine. And I says, Mom, how come you're not taking this medicine? And she says, well, we can't afford it. That's pretty sad when a mother gives up her medicine so the kids can have a pie or whatever it may be. Yeah. She was an excellent mother. She was strict. Oh yeah, but
So this side here is your mother,
my father, Herr ruht in Gott, that's in German, here rests in God, Catherine Boechler, born February the 5th, 1988, and died July the 15th, 1950.
So 1950, you were...
Yeah, that's why I got married in the fall of 1950.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was a big problem because when somebody passed away, you weren't supposed to have any celebrations like dances and so on. And I'm going to get married a few months afterwards, and oh boy, my dad was dead set against the wedding dance. Oh yeah. But he finally says, okay. So we did have our wedding dance. Then underneath is my father, Franz Boechler, born in 1884 and died in 1975. He lived 25 years after my mother passed away.
And then on this side over here are your grandparents.
Here again, of course, it's in German. Hier ruht in Gott, here rests in God. Franz Boechler, born 1857, gestorben, which means he died in February of the 16th in 1924. And his wife, Regina Boechler, born in born 11th of June in 1859. She was 2 years younger than him, and died on the 28th of March 1947. I was 47. I thought I was 46.
So how old were you then when she passed away, your grandmother?
I'd have been 21.
Okay. So do you remember her funeral?
Oh yeah, we dug the grave here. In fact, when we were digging the grave, we did it by shovel, and it was in March, and it was slushy out here, and we boys were digging the grave. My brother Charlie and Greg and so on, and we were throwing snowballs, and Charlie stuck his head out of the grave at the wrong time and I smashed him right in the face with a snowball. I thought he was going to kill me, but he never said a word. Yeah.
So you actually helped dig your grandmother's grave?
Yeah.
Oh. And what about with your mother?
Grandfather was buried in a cemetery that's about 2 miles southwest of here.
Oh, the Allen East one?
No, Allen West one.
Allen West one?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the East one's over there.
Yeah. And my father, when they started this cemetery in the late 30s, I was serving Mass for the first person that was a Bits boy that died from pneumonia over in the corner there. And I think it was in about 38, 39, in that area somewhere, they started this cemetery. My father did not want his grandfather laying out there. So he got somebody to bring his remains in and put them in here. That was before my grandmother passed away. So I wasn't involved in that.
So your mother died 3 years after your grandmother died? She died in 1950?
Yeah, that's right.
So did you help dig your mother's grave?
Oh yeah. We helped to dig the mother's grave. And I was in charge of my dad's grave. And because I had helped many of the other uncles and so on, I asked my first cousins to dig my father's grave. And they came in and dug it then, so I wasn't involved in that.
So back then, what was a funeral service like?
Well, a funeral service in those days was a little different because, in the 40s, the transportation was not like with my mother. That was in the 50s already. We had, I guess we had cars too in the 40s when my grandmother passed away. But the person who had passed away, grandmother passed away in our house out on the farm. And so the first thing you did was you drove to the doctor who was about 3 miles away and got him to come down and pronounce her dead and see that there was no foul play. And so I don't remember whether the body was taken to Saskatoon or whether the coffin was brought down and she was put in the coffin there and buried here. My mother passed away in the hospital in Saskatoon, and There the funeral home took over, and I wasn't involved in any of the arrangements. And they brought her down the night before the funeral, and they had prayers in the church. And she stayed in the church overnight, and we sat wake overnight, taking turns. And the next morning, then she was buried. My father passed away in Watrous, which is a town about 40 miles over there, in the hospital. He passed away while he was having breakfast. My mother passed away from cancer, by the way. And so there too, the funeral home took over and brought him here. And nowadays it's done a little different. Somebody passes away, of course they pass away in Saskatoon or in Watrous. And evening prayers the night before are said at the funeral home. And then the next day the body is brought down and buried through the church, yeah. The church, of course, has a mass, a requiem mass. I don't know what it means in English. It's requiem in Latin. Mass for the departed, I guess. And then the person is buried here, yeah.
So, with a funeral out at the gravesite, would there be any singing or prayers said as they were burying?
Yeah, very much like you see in the movies, except for the church part. After the celebration at the Mass, you know, at the service at the Mass, the body is then brought over here by the hearse, and the pallbearers carry the body onto the grave, and the priest always comes along and blesses the body with holy water and says prayers. And the people, there's a lot of people around, especially if it's a nice day. If it's a stormy, miserable day, only the immediate family comes out. And then, of course, the people go away. The body is not covered until the people are all gone away. And then...
This over here, is this your brother Charles?
That's my brother Charles, yeah.
With a snowball?
Yeah.
And how did, can you tell me first, tell me a little bit about Charlie when you were growing up. What type of a brother was he?
He was a very comical fellow. He had something to say about pretty well everything. He was very liked. He was a very determined fellow. If he decided that we should all get together and go to a dance, we went to the dance. That was all there was to it, you know, even though we were married and so on. He was very persuasive. And but he did a lot of drinking. In fact, he was told if he doesn't quit drinking, he's going to get a heart attack, and that's what he died from. He was an alcoholic, but he wasn't a wino. He ran his farm and those kinds of things, but he did a lot of drinking, you know, much more than he should have. And he was visiting neighbors out on the farm in another farm, and he left the house and fell down dead in front of the steps. Yeah, it's on a Sunday afternoon, yeah. It was very difficult. They had 11 children, none of them married. And his wife had a tough time. We pitched together and helped her out on the farm for a few years, and then she had to sell the land and moved into town and took in boarders and paid her way that way.
So when you were growing up, were you close to Charlie?
Oh yeah, well, as a family we were all very close. You know, we'd razz each other and tease each other, and we weren't a fighting group. That we never got into wrestling and boxing and those kind of things. But yeah. It was a very nice family to be raised in, and people who are raised in a small family don't have a clue as to how wonderful it is to have a big family. You learn so much. You learn some things you shouldn't learn. But you learn so much from your older, you know, even, you know, in the area of education. You know, they're using words the wrong way, pronouncing them wrong, and you learn them from them. And later on in life you only find out that, hey, they were pronouncing them wrong. I know it took me a long time to find out that, I don't know whether you're familiar with mirage. You know, up here, well, in the desert you have mirage. You see a water pool and it isn't there, huh? Yeah. And up here, you know, on a cool morning, either winter or summer, if you get out there around 4 or 5 o'clock, and if it's daylight already, you can sometimes see the neighboring town 20 feet up in the air, and farms and so on. It's a mirage. Well, my older brother called it a marriage. And so I grew up calling it a marriage till I finally somebody straightened me out and said, hey, that's not a marriage, that's a mirage.
And back back here, you said that you're...
The black one, the big black one at the back.
What is your grandparents? You want to go ahead and go first?
The Salzler
We'll go there,
side.
go to that one.
My grandfather, Salzler, was born in 1858. And I'm not too sure where he was born. Probably in Germany too, like my other grandfather. And he married a woman called Yund. Y-U-N-D. And my mother and my uncle Tony, her brother, were the two children that were from that first mother. Catherine Yund, I think her name was Catherine. She passed away, and then he married, and I don't know just what year he got married, to Catherine Heisler from up here. And then they had another two girls and a boy from the second marriage. Huh? So this is not really my grandmother. It's my step-grandmother.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So did you get to know your grandfather at all?
I knew them both, yes.
Okay.
I knew them both. We loved to take a rooster or a pint of cream up to Grandmother Salzler because we'd always get money. Oh man, we got 15 cents or 20 cents. Man, we were on cloud nine. Grandfather Salzler was a very quiet man, very much to himself. He was much older, of course, as a grandfather. He was born that much earlier. And we didn't have too much to do with him. Except he had a strawberry patch, and sometimes he would take us out into the strawberry patch, and we could eat our fill of strawberries. And we always remember the good things.
So did they come over from Russia as well?
Oh yeah. They came over to the United States. I don't know whether it was the same time or whether it was a little earlier. And he homesteaded land there, and there was a friend that came over with him who homesteaded land. And after a few years, and the crops were very poor. That's why these people came up to Canada. My grandfather, Boechler, moved up in 1903, and they moved up in 1905. And the fellow that was his friend decided to go back to Russia and gave his land to my grandfather. So my grandfather had much more land than just his homestead. And when he moved to Canada, he sold it. And then when he came up here, he had all that extra money, so he became a wealthy man. Yeah, wealthy man, of course, Like they said when he died, he had $75,000, which was like a millionaire now. You bought a loaf of bread for 3 cents and things like that. And they never bought any anyways.
So would you go over and visit your grandparents?
Oh yeah. I remember one time coming into town with, we had a 2-wheeled cart and a horse on it. And my mother had given me some cream and some butter or whatever it was to take up to Grandma Salzler. And it was in the summertime, holidays. And when I came into town, I had lots of friends in town. And when we went to school, they hopped on the cart and they drove around town with me. And when we came up to Grandma Salzler's to take this stuff in, I went in and they were just canning peaches. And this is fruit. Hey, man, we didn't get too much of that. So she says, are there any more of our family out on that cart? And I says, no. Okay, she says. So she gave me a bunch of peaches to eat inside before I went out. Otherwise, she'd have given me something to take out to this other.
They died in 1939 and 1940, so you were still pretty young when they passed away.
Yeah, okay. In 1940, I was 14. Yeah.
Do you remember their funerals?
Not really. It could have been that I was sick that day, or something like that, or whatever. I don't know, but I don't really remember their funeral that much. Yeah. It's funny, some things you remember so vividly, and other things you just can't lock in on.
Go ahead. And whose gravesite is this?
Well, this is Michael Ducart, who married my sister Annie in 1937. They had 3 girls and 2 boys. And they lived in a neighboring town called Bradwell. They lived out on the farm, but they lived over, that was their town called Bradwell. They got married in 1937, which was the height of the Depression. And it was very difficult. That's the one where I said that we tore the partition out of the granary and had a dance in the granary, and the banquet was all held in our house. It was a small service, a small celebration, I should say. And Mike passed away in 1966, in January of 1966. And she was left with the kids. One girl was married. And she tried to run the farm with the other two boys that she had. And it was tough going. And finally her oldest son got married, and he moved up to Edmonton, which is 400 miles away. He didn't care to farm, so the other boy took over. And I guess I made a mistake because he had three boys. The second oldest boy took over the farm and farmed along with the youngest boy. It didn't work out too well. And finally the youngest boy got married and lived on the farm, and Annie moved into town. She bought the house that my dad used to live in town here. We had built him a house in 1956, and he sold it to her, and she lived in there. And her second youngest boy was an alcoholic. He would just drink and drink and drink. And he finally died because of the alcohol, I would think. And she lived, and no, he died after her. She died in 96, yeah.
So what type of a sister was she?
Very kind-hearted, very much like my mother. She was very, very close to me, always concerned about me, you know. I remember when we sold our land to the potash mine, she and Mike drove into the yard and says, "Don't be crazy, that little bit of money that you're getting will be gone in no time at all." You know, and I know her concern, but she didn't realize that we could rent the land back and keep farming it anyways, and there are other ways of making a living besides raising hogs and cattle. And yeah, she was very good, very nice. All my sisters were terrific. Yeah.
She was quite older than you too.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So was she out of the house by the time you were growing up?
Well, like she got married in 37, so I would have been 11 years old, huh? And so, you know, as a young fellow, I just vaguely remember the dances and the wedding reception and those kinds of things.
So when you were younger than 11, would she kind of take care of you?
Oh yeah. We slept with the girls. When we were kids, we always slept with the girls. You know, when we were little fellas, you know, they took us to bed and they tell us stories and so on. You know, it's a way different because, you know, there was no TV. And in that time we didn't even have a radio. So any kind of a hair-raising story was interesting.
And how did she die?
Cancer? Yeah.
Okay.
She passed away while I was down in Denver. I was just on my way back when she passed away. Yeah. I didn't know whether I should go down because she was getting pretty, you know, she was in the hospital and she wasn't doing that well when I went down to Denver to visit Marilyn. And I was hoping I could make it back. And I think I did make it back for the funeral. But I wasn't here when she passed away in the hospital.
Okay, go ahead and tell us who's buried at this site.
Well, this is my brother Irvin. He was the next younger to me. There was only a little over a year difference in our age, and I thought times when I was young he might catch me because it was so close. He was born in August, I think, and I was born in February. So, but a year different, huh? And when my mother passed away, my wife and I stayed on the home farm, and my youngest brother, Alphonse, stayed with us for the winter and the next summer, and we farmed together. Irvin moved to town with his father and lived with him. And Irvin was a very difficult child to handle. As a small child, you want to put his socks or his shoes on, he'd just fight and kick and scream, and I don't know how my parents put up with him, and I don't know how I put up with him neither sometimes. It was very difficult. I said he was very much like fire. He was a good friend, but a bad enemy. And he had trouble finding himself in life. He had gone down east to a Catholic home called Madonna House after he didn't get along too well with his father here. And then from then he came back to Regina, and I had a sister who was a nun in Regina who was teaching at a convent, and they gave him a job there. And from there he finally got to a service station as a gas pump jockey. And that's where he met Teresa Vance, and they got married. And after a year or two, they came up here, stayed with my father until they had a farmhouse built, moved a house on and a farm, and he started farming. And he called his farm the Single Spur, and that's why he's got that thing there and this little sign in the middle here. He wasn't a good farmer, and so somewhere along the line my dad said to me, you know, he's farming 2 quarters of land, one is his and one he rents from me, and he's not making any money. He says, why don't you talk him into getting a job at the Allen Potash mine, and you rent that other quarter of land from him. He'll get more from the third than he is getting this way. So that's what we did. So he started working at the Allen Potash mine. It was a godsend to him. Now he'd have to get up. He found it very hard getting up in the morning, but it's okay. He had a job, so he had to get up. And so he worked at the mine until he retired, because he had emphysema so bad, and then later on he developed cancer, and then one morning they called me at 3 o'clock in the morning and says, there's something wrong with my leg, you got to take me to the hospital. So I took him to the hospital and they amputated his leg. So he had but you know, he had dropped away from the faith very much in all of those years that he was working at the mine. He drank quite a bit, not as much as my brother Charlie, but he was very similar to Charlie in a way, and they drank quite a bit. But my 4 nuns, they prayed to high heaven so that he would come back to the church. And he did. After he lost his leg, he came back. Yeah. And then he passed away. Teresa, they had 4 children, a girl and 3 boys. None of them got an education. Irvin wasn't very much interested in education. And they dropped out of school, some at grade 9, some at grade 10. And now they've got They've got some jobs, not the greatest. None of them have any career you could speak of. They caretaker here and there and so on. One works at Burger King in Saskatoon. One of them didn't do too bad. He's a caretaker, but he's in a big area, in a big place, and he's a managing caretaker. So at least God be thanked, he's got something. She lives in town here, and she's on our food bank. Marilyn and I run a food bank in town here. We've done it for over 3 years now. And we started it out because we felt there were a lot of people in town that could use some help. And we found out that there were about 10 families at the time with their children that needed help. And some of them came to us, some of them we saw that they needed help and talked to them. And so, but because it's a small town, the people don't want to come and get it, so we deliver 2 times a month. We pick it up at the co-op store. We've got a bin and people put food in there, and we get a lot of financial help. The mine out here gave us $400. On Good Friday, our celebration at the collection took in $800, and they gave us $400. And the Knights of Columbus gave us $300. The CWL gave us $300. A man who's out on the farm has given us for over 3 years now a dozen of eggs twice a month for everybody that's on the food bank. It is unbelievably fabulous the way the people cooperate. Tops, when they don't lose any weight, they got to bring something for the food bank, and so we get a lot of money. You know, Tops is an organization where I don't know whether you're familiar with it. Oh, it's an exercising. You're supposed to lose weight. When they don't lose weight, they're penalized. So, you know, that's how we get the food, and we deliver it. Teresa is on our food bank too. We don't ask questions, we just give whoever needs it. A woman called us the other day, she's got 4 kids, she moved into town. Can I have help from the food bank? Of course. And sometimes, you know, we go and we buy some chocolate bars with the money that we have from the others, and we buy chocolate bars and put it in, and you take it up to a home and you give it in, and the little kid looks, Mom, there's chocolate bars in here.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's
It's a great blessing, you know, to be given an opportunity to do something like that.
And then this is the site of your other brother, Frank.
Yeah, this is my brother Frank. He was the oldest one in the family. Are you ready there? Yeah, he was the oldest one in the family, and I never really knew him as a brother because he was that much older, much more aloof. Yeah, he wasn't. I was young, and I was just a dumb kid, you know, and so on. But as the time went on, you know, once you get older, 10 years, 20 years don't make the same difference as when you're 2 and 20. So, yeah, he was a good guy. He was a good guy to us, yeah. He talked me into a lot of positions. One was on the local school board, one was on the parish council, and one was on the Saskatoon East School Board. Saskatoon East School Board was a big area. It takes in 5 towns in a neighborhood around of about 100 miles around like that. And So I was a trustee on there for 15 years. You negotiate with teacher salaries and you negotiate with bus contracts and all of those things. And Frank got me into that. Frank also taught me into being a DRO at an election, which I didn't want to touch, which is a deputy returning officer at an election of a provincial or federal election. You know, you have to hand out the ballots and you have to keep order and all those kind of things. And I was scared of every one of those jobs, but Frank was very convincing, and I was happy that I took them on. I learned something in life out of them, yeah. He was married to Pauline. She was a town girl and didn't know nothing about cooking or baking or anything like that. And he married her, and of course he got married in 1930 or 31 in there. And they lived out on the farm, and you don't buy bread when you live out on the farm on the 30s, so Pauline had to bake bread. So she didn't know how to really do it. So one day when Frank went out to work in the morning, she's going to bake bread that day. So she got the dough and she got the recipe and she mixed this stuff all together and punched it down and everything else, and it wouldn't rise and wouldn't rise. And it was noon. Frank was coming in for dinner and she was afraid, she was ashamed. So she took this puddle of dough and took it out on the south side of some trees and dug a hole and put it in and covered it with ground. Frank came home and had dinner and went back out again. At 4 o'clock, Pauline comes out and the sun was shining on the dough was lazy. So she learned how to make dough and make bread.
That is a great one.
But you know, they lived there with 2 or 3 years and then their house burned down. The homes in those days, the stove was here, the kitchen stove, which heated the whole house, was a small house, and the stovepipes ran about from me to Maryland, across into the chimney, and those stovepipes collapsed down on the bed, and the whole thing started burning. And she was standing outside getting some firewood to go back in and put it in when she saw these flames. And of course, hysterically, she would run in there and try and get everything. But a fellow was farming right across the road. And when he saw this, he stopped the horses and ran across and grabbed her and wouldn't let her go into the house because she'd in her, whatever you want to call it, she would have gone back in there, tried to save what she could. My brother Frank was over at our place farming, working on the land. When he saw the fire, he took one of the horses off of the four and hopped on and rode home. But everything burnt. They lost every blessed thing they had. No more wedding pictures, no more nothing.
So this is the brother that lived in the summer kitchen for a while.
That's right. We moved the summer kitchen over for them then, and they lived in there for a long, long time. And then they built their house. And I was there when he quit farming. He sold me his buildings for a song. And I was taking off of this one that used to be our summer kitchen. It was sheeted on the inside with boards about this wide, nice thin boards, and I was going to save them. And as I started tearing them off, I tore off one sheet of wallpaper after another. And I don't know whether you know the song, The Shifting, Whispering Sands. It talks about in the desert how the miner left his buckboard and went to work that day, and the burros tore their halter when they thought he'd gone to stray. And he wandered far in search of water, and finally he fell down and died. And now everything is covered by the shifting, whispering sands. And I just cried when I saw the struggles that they had of putting one sheet of wallpaper over another, a few little moldings on the side to try and keep the wind out and so on. Those were tough years. People ask us, somebody interviewed me once what it was like, one of the school kids interviewed me once what it was like to be a child during the 30s. And I said, you know, it's the first time somebody interviews me as a child. Always interview the parents, what the parents went through. What do you think the children went through? You know, homemade moccasins, sandwiches that you were ashamed to show, and so on, hand-me-down clothes. Yeah. But, boy, what the parents went through, we didn't have to go through. But he raised his 11 or 12 children, all of them. Beautiful jobs. Teachers in the technical school, management of the technical school, one of them in Saskatoon. Teaching all kinds of courses in electronics and in woodworking and those kind of things, mechanics and welding and so on. Yeah. I learned a lot from him because he was more church-going than I was. He would let his combine stand. Well, first Friday of the month to us Catholics is a very big day. And he would let his combine stand and go to church in the morning on First Friday. Nobody else did that. But he farmed right beside me, and I saw that, and I learned a lot from him.
Okay, so we're at the gravesite of Casper, your other brother.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about him?
Well, the writing on top is Spanish, and I don't know what it means. We love you with all our souls. Maybe that's what it means. I don't know. Because Casper, when the war broke out, and two of my boys were drafted, and we had Tony at home yet, who was in eligible age, my brother Casper, who was eligible age. And Casper was always interested in books and in radio and so on. And he would like to have taken a radio course. So my dad thought if he shipped him out to Montreal, where Casper was willing to go, of course, he might not be drafted into the army for whatever reason. He was called down there, but he was rejected, so he didn't have to go into the army. But he took his radio course, and he worked for an airline company fixing radios in the airplanes. And that way he got to the Bahamas for a contract. And then he came back to Montreal again. And then they shipped him down to Argentina, to Buenos Aires. And he was working down there, and of course he was getting paid in Canadian money, and he was having a heyday down there with his money. It was probably worth 5 times what the rest of them were getting. He met a woman called Patrona, much younger than he was, and they got married, and they had a big house and a maid, and everything was going great. But finally the contract, anyways, Casper told us the contract ran out, and he got paid in Spanish money, which would have been way down there. So he decided to come home. But he was also a very sentimental guy, and he wanted to get home where the rest of his family was. And poor Patsy, of course, we call her Patsy instead of Patrona, she had to come along. And when they left, Patsy's mother said to Casper, "If you ever mistreat her, after I'm dead, I'll come and haunt you." So they moved up here, and oh my goodness gracious, they moved into a rented farm south of town, near 10 miles. No flushing water, nothing like that at all. You know, well, we didn't have running water on the farm neither, but, you know, when she moved from there into this, she was a great sport, and she still is. She's still alive, and she's a great sport. And they had 4 boys. Yeah, they didn't have any girls. They had 4 boys. The oldest one was Guy, and he started a band when he grew up, and he had a good band called Dear Friends. They played for the Cavalier chain in Canada, and they were supposed to go to Japan to play when she became pregnant, and they had to cancel that one, but they played in many places with their band. And one time they were driving in Alberta, west of here, and the semi came towards them on an icy road, and the semi jackknifed right in front of him and went right underneath the semi. His wife and the 2 children that they had were laying in the back seat on a mattress, and they were saved. But the 3 guys in the front, there was the 4th one in the band, she was the vocalist and played the keyboard. They were all just killed like that. And Patsy, of course, took that very hard, her oldest son. The others, one became a school teacher, one is a mechanic, and I don't know what the other one is doing, but they're all doing well. Yeah. He of course, he had the Spanish in him for the music, you know, and he was good at it, yeah. And like I said, you know, he married Patsy, and Patsy didn't know a word of English when she came up here. And we used to say to her, "How do you like Canada?" And finally she learned to say good, and so on. So, but many years ago when I was playing in the band, we were playing for a singles dance in Saskatoon. And Patsy was single, and a lot of the single people would come to these dances. So when we sat down for lunch, I was sitting beside her, and a guy came along with a TV camera, he was taking pictures. And he comes up there and he says to me, "And who are you?" "Oh, you're the guy who plays the guitar in the band." "Yeah, and who's this?" "That's my girlfriend here, Patsy." And Patsy laughed, of course, and he put it on whatever he did. But I said to Patsy, "You know, I often asked you, how did you like Canada? How did you really like Canada?" "Oh my God," she says. "I can tell you now how I left a mansion down there with a maid, and I came up here." But, you know, yeah, she didn't complain about it, you know, she lived it through, yeah. As a young fellow, Casper, he wasn't handy. I don't know how on earth he fixed radios with his hands, because he wasn't handy with his hands. He was no farmer. When he came back here and farmed, oh, it was pathetic. he sold his, he had bought 3/4 of land and had some of it paid off when the mine came along and offered to buy the whole thing. So he sold it. He bought it maybe for $25 an acre, but he sold it for $100 an acre. So he had no problem paying off the land, the mortgage on the land, and he could still farm the land. So, and in that time I moved to town. My brother Frank sold out and moved to town. My brother Al sold to the mine and moved to town because we were all in a cluster in there. And so Casper said, well, this is the trend. I'm moving to town too. And he should never have moved to town. He had 4 boys. They could have worked the land out there. And they just bummed around in town then. And so things went really bad, and it was a blessing for him. He called me one night on the phone. He says, I'm an old man. I don't know, maybe he was 70. And he says, I'm an old man. I'm tired of working, and I've got really nothing to retire on. And then in 78, our good Lord took him and solved his whole problem.
So will you tell me a little bit about why he has a cement covering over his...
A lot of that was done over in the other side over there. There was a guy, was a contractor, and he'd come out and he'd do this. And you know how fads are. And for some reason or another, I guess Patsy thought this was nice, and so she did this for him. She was a great girl, Patsy. She used to have a kiosk in one of the malls in Saskatoon, where she would sell hot dogs and drinks and so on. You know what those little things are, yeah? And she'd work in there. And my youngest boy, Kurt, was only 11 years old when Will passed away. And so we'd go shopping, and he'd always come along with me, and we'd go in there, and I'd say, Kurt, you want a hot dog? Yeah. So we'd go up there, and she made the best hot dogs in the world because she toasted the buns. And then she put the hot dog in there and gave it to him, and I wanted to pay. No, you don't have to pay for that. They don't have to know everything I sell in here. That kind of a nature, you know. Great girl, yeah.
Okay, so this is your first wife's gravesite. You want to tell us a little bit about her?
Well, her maiden name was Lillian Dibert, and she had very severe problems with pimples. There were some times that as a good Catholic she couldn't go to church Sundays because of the pimples in her face. It was unbelievable as she was young growing up. And she became so bashful, she wouldn't go anywhere. She very seldom would go to a dance. Her parents had to coax her to go to a dance and so on. But later on, you know, this all disappeared. Her complexion was great, but the attitude still stayed with her. Very bashful. And she was dating another boy by the name of Bame, Ed Bame, and her parents did not like them. They had no use for him at all. And I didn't know this, but when I asked her to come to the dance that I told you about, we were going to the dance, and I didn't know that she was dating that guy. And when her parents found out, and it sounds maybe a little bit like bragging, but her parents found out she was going with me, they were on cloud 9, because they liked our family. That was a big thing, you know. There was something about the Bames that, whatever it was, she didn't like. So with Ed Bame, she had to be home by 10 o'clock at night. But when we went out, there was no problem when we came home. So it goes to show you, you know, how they trusted me or were just happy, whatever. Anyways, we dated for a year, and then we got married. We met in the fall of '49 when we were doing this drama play. And we got married in November 7th in 1950.
Can you tell us a little bit about what your wedding was like?
Our wedding was a very nice wedding, except for the fact that my father didn't want us to have any kind of a dance or anything like that. But he finally relented enough to say, okay, but he says, but you don't dance. And I said, well, that's impossible, Dad. I can't go in there and not dance when my wife is supposed to dancing. Couples come up and ask her for a dance and me for a dance. Well, okay, you can dance 3 dances. And then when the dance started going and so on, my brother Charlie, who's buried over there, he was kind of a guy, the hell with this noise. He says, we're dancing. And he got his wife and started dancing, and then everybody started dancing. And my dad finally got disgusted and went back home and went to bed. So that was the wedding dance. The wedding in itself was very nice because we got married at 10 o'clock in the morning. We had a nice lunch in the hall for everybody, a breakfast in the hall for everybody that was in the families, her side and my side. And then we went to Saskatoon. She was very bashful. We were sitting in the back seat, and my brother-in-law and his wife were driving in the front, and I wanted to give her a kiss, and she says, no, they might see us in the mirror. You know, she was raised, and so, I had to understand this and try and understand it, and at least. So anyway, so we came back then, and then we had a big banquet in the hall for many, many friends. In those days, there was not this thing of having liquor in the hall, like you couldn't get a permit. You weren't allowed to have liquor in the hall. But in the kitchen, they had a few bottles, and people would go in and have a drink in there. And yeah, we had the blackjack band played my wedding dance without me on the guitar. And we had 2 saxes and an accordion and a drum, lacking the guitar. But in those days, the people didn't even know what a guitar was. At one of the dances I played, one guy came up and said, "What is that instrument you're playing?" Go back to the 40s and the 30s, and you'll get a big change, huh? Yes, we had a nice wedding that way. And we lived in the home farm then, and my brother Alfred stayed with us. He paid us a few dollars a month for groceries and stayed with us. And then he met the girl that he married, and they got married in '92. So we're planning to get married in the fall of '92, so we had to get out. We had saved a few $1,000s, and with that we borrowed enough money from the bank to build ourselves the little house that we built. And it was cozy, it was a nice place, it was well built and so on. And we started our farm. We only had 2 quarters of land, so you can't do too much as far as grain goes. But her family milked a lot of cows by hand. And I had broken my hand once in baseball, where the guy hit me across the back with the bat when he stepped back, and once in hockey. And so it was very hard for me to milk. But we bought a milk machine, and we milked 12 cows and raised hogs and cattle and worked our way ahead in that way, And yeah, when the mine came along, it was a great blessing, because it changed our whole lifestyle and to the better.
And how did she die?
Pardon?
How did she die?
She died of cancer, lung cancer. She never smoked. I smoked for many years, and then later on quit. In the mid-'70s, I quit smoking, but whether it came from that or not, I don't know. We were told when we were small, there's nothing wrong with smoking, because there was nothing. The only thing they said, if you smoke, you don't grow tall. We saw lots of big guys walking around smoking, so we didn't pay too much attention to that story. But I quit smoking then, and yeah, she passed away. She passed away very peaceful, no pain to speak of. It was a great blessing, yeah.
Well, I have one concluding question. And why did you decide to participate today in our project?
Because Anne Reel talked to me. And she said to me, "Hey, have you ever been involved in something like this?" And I said, "No." And she says, "Well, these people down in the States want to come up and they want to interview." And I suppose, as you can see from the plaque I put over there, I have an awful lot of respect for my heritage. These people came over here. I am here instead of in Russia, because they left over there, or else I probably would have been born in Russia, and I'd have been a commie. God forbid. But so the German nationality, although I don't put too much into the German food, as you well know, or I don't put too much into many of the things like Hitler and his guys over there. When we went to school in the war, we were told by our mother, if somebody asks you what nationality you are, you don't ever say German. You say Canadian. And even to this day, if I fill out a form and ask for my nationality, it's not going to be German. It's going to be Canadian. My dad sat in front of the radio with his ear on the speaker because the battery was low, and listened to what was going on in the war. And I didn't know which side he was cheering for sometimes, because his heritage laid over there in Germany. And he didn't trust those darn Englishmen. They can lie to beat the band. So, I don't know. I just thought, I don't mind, answering a few questions and helping somebody. I'm a great guy for helping. And if I can help somebody in anything and it doesn't cost me anything, why shouldn't I help?
Well, we appreciate you taking the time and spending it with us today.
No, it's great, great.